Have you ever felt like you're watching your life unfold from a place of profound detachment, as if you're an ancient soul observing humanity for the very last time? There's a haunting recognition that some individuals carry, a visceral knowing that whispers, "This is it. This is your final performance on the stage of human existence." What if the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that has governed your consciousness for millennia is finally coming to an end? What if you're not just living another life, but experiencing the grand finale of your soul's earthly journey? Picture this: after countless incarnations, after learning every lesson, experiencing every emotion, and playing every possible role in the human drama, your consciousness has reached a point of completion so profound that the very fabric of reincarnation can no longer hold you. You're not just another soul cycling through existence. You're a graduate preparing to transcend the entire system. Throughout my career as a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, I have devoted my life to understanding the depths of human consciousness and the archetypal patterns that govern our spiritual evolution. Through decades of research into the collective unconscious and the process of individuation, I have come to describe human development not as a linear progression, but as a spiral journey toward wholeness. My work suggests that certain individuals reach a point where they've integrated all aspects of their psyche, achieved the realized self, and are preparing to transcend the cycle of earthly incarnations. But how would you recognize if you're one of these souls approaching graduation? The signs are subtle, yet unmistakable, woven into the fabric of your daily experience. Before we explore these indicators, let me share my understanding of the individuation process more deeply. I propose that human consciousness undergoes a fundamental transformation throughout multiple lifetimes, moving from unconscious participation in archetypal patterns to conscious integration of all aspects of the psyche. This process, which I term individuation, involves the reconciliation of opposites within the self, the integration of shadow material, and the eventual transcendence of the ego-self axis. For most souls, this process requires numerous incarnations to achieve completion. Interestingly, my analytical psychology aligns remarkably with ancient wisdom traditions regarding reincarnation and soul evolution. My concept of the collective unconscious mirrors the Akashic records described in Eastern philosophy, while my understanding of archetypal patterns echoes the karmic templates that govern soul development across lifetimes. The signs of a soul living their final incarnation, according to my framework, don't indicate conventional spiritual achievement, but rather the completion of the individuation process. These individuals have successfully integrated their shadow, connected with their anima or animus, and achieved a stable relationship between ego and self. They're not becoming more spiritual, they're becoming more whole. The first sign that you may be completing your final earthly cycle is what I call the transcendent function, operating spontaneously in your life. This manifests as a natural ability to hold paradox without needing to resolve it, finding meaning in apparent contradictions rather than being disturbed by them. You can simultaneously embrace being human while recognizing your transcendent nature, love deeply while maintaining detachment, and participate fully in life while knowing it's ultimately an illusion. I describe this capacity in my work Mysterium Conjunctionis, explaining that individuals approaching psychological wholeness develop what it means paradoxical thinking. This isn't intellectual cleverness, but a fundamental shift in consciousness that allows for the coexistence of opposing truths without mental conflict. You might notice this manifesting as an unusual comfort with uncertainty, an ability to find wisdom in contradictory perspectives, or a natural tendency to see the bigger picture that encompasses all seemingly opposing viewpoints. This isn't fence-sitting or indecision, but genuine recognition that ultimate truth often exists in the tension between polarities. This paradoxical awareness creates a unique quality of presence that others often find both fascinating and comforting. You become a reconciling symbol, someone who naturally bridges differences and helps others find common ground. This capacity emerges not from effort, but from having integrated the opposites within your own psyche. The second indicator appears as what I term active imagination, occurring naturally in your daily life. Rather than needing formal techniques to access unconscious material, you spontaneously receive insights, symbolic images, and creative solutions that seem to emerge from a deeper source than ordinary thinking. I consider active imagination essential for advanced psychological development, describing it as the method by which conscious and unconscious contents unite. For souls in their final incarnation, this process becomes effortless and continuous, creating a constant dialogue between conscious awareness and the wisdom of the unconscious. You can experience this as vivid dreams that provide clear guidance, sudden insights that solve complex problems, or creative inspirations that seem to flow from beyond your personal knowledge. These aren't random occurrences, but indications that the barrier between conscious and unconscious has become permeable, allowing free flow of information between different levels of psyche. This trait often manifests as an unusual relationship with creativity. Rather than struggling to access inspiration, you find yourself serving as a conduit for creative expression that feels like it's flowing through you rather than from you. I describe this as participation in the creative unconscious, the source of genuine innovation and artistic expression. The third characteristic emerges as complete integration of your shadow material. I consider shadow work essential for psychological wholeness, describing the shadow as the repository of repressed, denied, or undeveloped aspects of personality. For most people, shadow integration remains incomplete across multiple lifetimes, creating recurring patterns of projection and unconscious behavior. However, souls approaching their final incarnation demonstrate which is shadow transparency. You've not only recognized and integrated your personal shadow, but you've also come to terms with the collective shadow of humanity. This creates an unusual quality of non-judgment toward others' negative behaviors, not because you approve of them, but because you recognize them as aspects of the human condition you've also embodied. This integration manifests as genuine compassion for human weakness, including your own. You no longer need to maintain a positive self-image by projecting negative qualities onto others. Instead, you can acknowledge the full spectrum of human potential within yourself, creating authentic wholeness rather than artificial perfection. I emphasize that shadow integration isn't about becoming perfect, but about becoming real. You develop moral imagination, that the ability to understand how any human behavior could emerge from specific circumstances and psychological conditions. This doesn't excuse harmful actions, but it eliminates the self-righteousness that prevents genuine understanding. The fourth sign appears as natural access to what I call the collective unconscious. Rather than being limited to personal memories and experiences, you spontaneously connect with archetypal patterns and universal wisdom that transcends individual learning. This manifests as intuitive understanding of human nature, predictive insights about collective trends, and access to knowledge you haven't acquired through normal means. I describe the collective unconscious as the deepest layer of the psyche, containing the accumulated wisdom of human evolution stored in archetypal forms. Most people access this material only occasionally, usually during significant life transitions or through deliberate practices like analysis or meditation. For souls in their final incarnation, this access becomes natural and continuous. You might find yourself understanding complex psychological dynamics without formal training, predicting cultural shifts before they become obvious, or possessing wisdom about human nature that seems to come from beyond your personal experience. This trait often creates a quality of presence that others find both comforting and unsettling. People may seek your counsel instinctively, sensing that you have access to deeper understanding. You become a wise old man or wise old woman archetype, regardless of your chronological age. The fifth characteristic manifests as synchronicity, which means becoming a primary organizing principle in your life. Rather than experiencing meaningful coincidences occasionally, your entire existence seems orchestrated by causal connections that respond to your internal state and spiritual development. I coined the term synchronicity to describe meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by cause and effect. I consider synchronicity evidence of the underlying unity of psyche and matter, suggesting that consciousness and physical reality are two aspects of a more fundamental wholeness. For souls completing their final cycle, synchronicity becomes so frequent and precise that it transforms their relationship with reality itself. You begin to experience life as a continuous dialogue between inner and outer worlds, where external events mirror internal processes with uncanny accuracy. This might manifest as books appearing exactly when you need specific information, meeting people who provide perfect guidance at crucial moments, or finding yourself in situations that address precisely what you're working through internally. These aren't random events, but indications that your consciousness is aligning with the transcendent function of the collective unconscious. The sixth trait appears as natural embodiment of the self archetype. In my psychology, the self represents the totality of the psyche, the archetype of wholeness, and the regulating center of the personality. Most individuals experience the self only in glimpses, usually during peak experiences or significant transitions. However, souls in their final incarnation demonstrate stable self-realization. You've moved beyond ego identification to a stable sense of identity rooted in wholeness rather than fragmentation. This doesn't mean ego death, but ego self-access, a healthy relationship between personal identity and transpersonal awareness. This integration creates a unique quality of presence characterized by what I describe as authentic being. You're no longer performing a role or trying to become something, but simply expressing what you already are. This authenticity is immediately recognizable to others, creating constellation of the self-archetype in their presence. You might notice this as a natural authority that doesn't depend on external credentials, an ability to inspire others simply through being yourself, or a quality of presence that helps others connect with their own deeper nature. This isn't charisma or personality, but a numinous presence, the quality of someone who embodies archetypal wholeness. The seventh sign emerges as transcendence of the opposites. Throughout psychological development, individuals struggle with polarities within their psyche, good and evil, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, individual and collective. For souls in their final incarnation, these opposites have been reconciled into the transcendent function. This reconciliation doesn't mean eliminating differences, but finding the unifying principle that contains all opposites. You develop both and thinking rather than either or consciousness, allowing you to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without internal conflict. This trait manifests as unusual psychological flexibility and ability to understand all sides of any situation without becoming paralyzed by complexity. You can be both strong and vulnerable, independent and connected, serious and playful, without experiencing these qualities as contradictory. I consider this integration essential for the realization of the self. It represents the completion of the individuation process, the achievement of psychological wholeness that transcends the dualistic thinking that characterizes earlier developmental stages. The eighth characteristic appears as what I describe as participation mystique with all of existence. Rather than experiencing yourself as separate from the world, you recognize your fundamental interconnection with all of life. This isn't intellectual understanding, but lived reality, where the boundary between self and environment becomes permeable. I borrowed this term from anthropologist Lucien Levy-Bruhl, who used it to describe the primitive psychology where individuals don't distinguish clearly between themselves and their environment. However, I reinterpret this concept as representing an advanced psychological state where the artificial separation between self and world dissolves. For souls completing their final incarnation, this participation isn't regression to primitive consciousness, but progression beyond the isolation of modern ego development. You experience that cosmic consciousness, awareness that recognizes individual existence as an expression of universal life rather than separate from it. This might manifest as spontaneous empathy with all living beings, direct knowing of others' inner states, or experiences of unity with nature that feel more real than ordinary perception. You begin to experience the collective aspect of the self, recognizing your individual journey as part of a larger evolutionary process. The ninth and final sign appears as the union of opposites, achieving stable expression in your personality. This represents the completion of what I call the coniunctio, the alchemical marriage of all polarities within the psyche. You've not only integrated your shadow and connected with your anima or animus, but you've achieved what I consider the ultimate goal of psychological development, the realization of the self. This integration creates the individuated person, someone who has achieved psychological wholeness without losing their unique individual characteristics. You become a unique being who simultaneously embodies universal principles. The most profound aspect of this final integration is the transcendent function becoming your natural mode of operation. Rather than being pulled between opposing forces within your psyche, you become the reconciling principle that unites all contradictions. This creates a quality of presence that I describe as numinous, possessing the ability to constellation, healing, and wholeness in others. As these 9 traits converge in your experience, a profound transformation occurs that I describe as the birth of the self. This isn't a dramatic event, but a gradual recognition of what you've always been beneath the accumulated layers of conditioning and identification. The boundary between seeking and being dissolves, revealing ordinary existence as the sacred journey you've been pursuing all along. What happens when a soul completes their final incarnation according to my understanding? I am careful not to define this experience in concrete terms, suggesting that it transcends psychological categories, which can be described as graduation from the school of earthly existence, consciousness returning to its original wholeness while retaining the wisdom gained through embodied experience. Whether you recognize several of these traits in your experience or simply feel drawn to this exploration, remember that psychological development isn't a competition or achievement. The recognition of these qualities isn't cause for spiritual pride, but invitation to deeper presence with whatever arises in your experience. If you're indeed completing your final cycle, this understanding doesn't separate you from others, but connects you more deeply to the collective journey of human evolution. Your individuation doesn't remove you from humanity, but enables you to participate more fully in its psychological development, bringing what I call healing presence to the beautiful, challenging, and utterly mysterious experience of being alive. What traits have you recognized in yourself? I invite you to share your experiences to the world. Until next time, may your journey toward wholeness be filled with presence, regardless of which cycle you're experiencing.